Hey everyone, welcome back to my show where I review Netflix shows, movies, and a whole lot of Spider-Man, plus 90s stuff of course. Now my previous video was a Spider-Man video in which I discussed which movie Spider-Man is the best to me, and kind of conveyed my matrix in judging which one is the best. And that the 90s cartoon Spider-Man is a big factor influencing the things I judge. It was a long discussion, but I did say after that I'm going to compare the 90s cartoon Venom against the Venom movie. That's going to take a little bit of time, so I thought I'd just kind of shoot this quick video discussing the fate of Spider-Man. You see, when it comes to the kind of main moral, main message of Spider-Man, the main struggle, many people seem to think that it's with great power comes great responsibility. And I'm not saying that's off, but most people really think of one story in relation to that main message. The story of Uncle Ben. That whole phrasing of with great power comes great responsibility is so neatly packed and clear to the point of what the message is that it can spread beyond the whole comic book world, and I find that many people want to quote it even though that they kind of know it's from Spider-Man. Now technically it wasn't Uncle Ben who said that. It was actually first Peter Parker who said it in reflection on the events that happened with Uncle Ben. Of course, through many different iterations, often enough it is Uncle Ben himself saying it, so if somebody attributes it to Uncle Ben, that's perfectly fine. But anyway, much in line with what I was saying in my previous video, there are actually two great important deaths when it comes to Spider-Man, aka Peter Parker. The death of his uncle, Uncle Ben, as well as the death of Gwen Stacy at the bridge scene. These two deaths really shape Spider-Man's life in an important way, but we often only talk about one. Maybe the other one's not talked about because not everyone is completely willing to kill off the main love of the main character. That's a really risky thing, and that's why I tried to actually give great credit to Sony to trying its best to stick to canon even when it comes to taking a massive risk, which it is a massive risk, to killing off the main love interest of the main character. But the importance of both these deaths I didn't really fully discuss. I only just tried to explain that both of them are massively important to Spider-Man, and in fact the latter of the two impacted the entire comic book industry. The idea that a main character, main love interest of the hero could die and in a permanent fashion made people feel like, wow, threats could be real. But I failed to have the discussion I'm gonna have now, about why these deaths actually impact the kind of main story, main moral of Spider-Man. Not just its impact into the comic book industry, but how it affects Spider-Man himself. Let me get back to my point. When it comes to that moral, with great power comes great responsibility, we're often and only explicitly kind of suggested that this has to do with specifically Uncle Ben's death. Because of course we are told in many comic books and many cartoons and obviously many of the movies, save one of them, yet anyway, we are told a story where Spider-Man, aka Peter Parker, had the power to stop a criminal who would later kill his own uncle. And because of that, Peter Parker blames himself, knowing if he only did act in that moment, he could have prevented the death of his uncle, and reflects on the fact that he had the power to do so easily, but just didn't. So from that he carries a guilt. And sure, that alone is enough to suggest with great power comes great responsibility. But we're taken into a flawed way of thinking if you think the idea is actually with great power comes great responsibility, because if you don't do something, your loved ones might get hurt. That's not it. That's actually half of the story, half of the moral, because the other half is with Gwen Stacy. Is with Gwen Stacy, or someone else. You see, often in different stories, Peter Parker, even as Spider-Man, even after reflecting on Uncle Ben's death, comes to a point where he feels like I should just quit being Spider-Man. And this is often prompted by the other moral aspect to being Spider-Man. Not just that if you don't act, your loved ones could get hurt, as told with Uncle Ben, but even if you do act, your loved ones could still get hurt. That's the story that's told with Gwen Stacy's death. For those of you who don't know, generally it's Green Goblin who throws Gwen Stacy off this bridge. Spider-Man, doing his web-slinging stuff, tries to save her, but in web-slinging her, she snaps her neck. So his attempt to try and save her actually directly leads to her death. And this massively destroys the kind of conscious moral situation Spider-Man was in. Now actually much later in the comics they try to reveal to Spider-Man to make him feel less guilty that actually Gwen Stacy died of shock on the way down, so she was already dead, But I think that kind of cheapens the moral lesson that was originally supposed to be there. That moral lesson for Spider-Man, that fate of Spider-Man and his loneliness is told through this impossible situation. A situation of if I don't do something when I have the power, my loved ones could die. And also, even if I do something and I have the power, my loved ones could still die. So why bother doing anything at all? In this part of the question is where the story of Spider-Man, where the moral of Spider-Man really shines. Should I do something? Should I even bother if people get hurt regardless of what I do? If I don't do something or if I do something? And in there, the morality of with great power comes great responsibility really shines, because it shows that you ought to do good if you have power, even if it's going to lead to people getting hurt. Spider-Man could hurt people by accident. You may not have all the powers in the world. You may not be the greatest hero of all time. But if you can be a hero, be a hero. For the more academic or philosophically inclined, let me say it this way, that despite what it may seem like with a one-sided Uncle Ben heavy diet of narratives that make use of this moral, this is not a pragmatic principle. It is not a consequentialist moral philosophy. It's a categorical imperative. It is not a principle of self-preservation. It is a sign of virtue that is truly tested in one's character in lose-lose situations. So yeah, Spider-Man is such a bright, beautiful, lovely character. He's so happy and joyous, he moves so uniquely, he's so hilarious, and he just pops out to me and anyone who's a Spider-Man fan. We see him first among all heroes. But when it comes to the moral lesson of Spider-Man of with great power comes great responsibility, I find it definitely very much underemphasized that this situation of do good because you have the power, that it's important to just do good and act. That this moral isn't really about, oh, if you don't do something, someone could get hurt, your loved ones could get hurt, and you'll blame yourself. No, that's just half of it. Because for Spider-Man, as I said, if you don't do something, someone could get hurt. And even if you do something, someone could get hurt. Your loved ones, his loved ones, die either way. And in that situation, you might feel like, what's the purpose? What's the point? Why bother doing anything at all? It could seem like it just doesn't even matter. Even there, even in a point in your life when you feel like it doesn't even matter, even if I do something, I can't really change the fact that my loved ones are gonna die. People around me are gonna get hurt. Things are not gonna be great. Still, in those moments, you gotta act. If you can, you gotta act. That's the moral of Spider-Man. The fate, I find, underemphasized. Maybe because we're overly focused on the Uncle Ben aspect of his story and not on the Gwen Stacy aspect. Thank you for checking out this video. It's supposed to be a quick video. I know it's just me here talking. It's not really the documentary style that I'm trying to get more used to, which I think draws more people in. A lot of people may not like seeing my face. But please subscribe anyway and stay tuned because I really am going to work on the Venom cartoon, 90s cartoon Venom versus the Venom movie, which there's a lot to say because there's a lot to say about this movie. Anyway, I wish you peace and victory.